Picture this. It is April 1986, a beautiful, sunny day in Southern California.
This sounds pretty ideal so far.
Right. Well, you are 23 years old, you are incredibly fit, and you are right in the middle of the biking portion of the Palm Springs Triathlon.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Yeah, and you are coming up to a really tricky intersection. You lock eyes with a police officer who is directing traffic, trying to follow his hand signals,
Yeah.
but he has his back to the oncoming traffic.
Oh, no. That is never a good setup.
And as you make the turn, an elderly one driving a red four-wheel drive Bronco going 55 miles an hour hits you squarely from behind.
We really, really need to pause on that speed for a second. I mean, 55 miles an hour.
It is massive.
Yeah, when a mass of metal that heavy hits a human body at that velocity, it is the kind of kinetic impact that does not just bruise you, it physically alters the entire trajectory of your life in like a fraction of a second.
Exactly. It is absolute physical devastation.
Yeah.
You are catapulted into the air, you land squarely on your backside on the hard asphalt, and the compressive force traveling up your spine is just catastrophic.
Just brutal.
We're talking about 6 shattered vertebrae, thoracic 8 through lumbar 1. The T8 vertebra alone is more than 60% collapsed.
Wow.
And the neural arch, which is that delicate bony structure that protects your spinal cord, is literally crushed like a pretzel. Bone fragments are pressing directly into the spinal cord itself.
Which, I mean, that is an immediate, terrifying medical emergency. At this point, the spine is entirely structurally compromised.
Boy, holding nothing up.
Right. If you were to try and stand up, the backbone would just collapse under your own weight. The bone fragments would push completely through the cord, and paralysis from the chest down would be instantaneous.
Right. So you are rushed to the hospital. You consult with 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California. And they look at the imaging, and they all give you the exact same brutal ultimatum. You either undergo a radical procedure called Harrington rod surgery, or you face permanent paralysis. There is no plan B.
Just surgery or a wheelchair.
Exactly. And just to paint a picture of this surgery, they would have to cut off the back parts of your vertebrae, screw 12-inch stainless steel rods directly into your spinal column, and then scrape bone fragments from your hip to paste over the top.
That sounds medieval.
It really does. But the person on that gurney, a young chiropractor named Joe Dispenza, looks at those 4 top surgeons and says, no.
He completely refuses the surgery.
Wait, he just said no to 4 top surgeons? I mean, that sounds incredibly reckless. Honestly, looking at this as someone with a background in science, my eyebrows are practically leaping off my forehead right now.
I completely understand the skepticism. I really do.
Because refusing that surgery does not sound brave to me. It sounds like a death wish, or at least, a wheelchair wish.
It sounds entirely illogical from a conventional medical standpoint, but the documentation is all there.
Is it, though?
Yeah, absolutely. We have the timelines, the x-rays, the CAT scans, the MRIs, the medical records. This is not just some urban legend that got passed around a yoga studio. It is a highly documented medical event.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a hard look at Joe Dispenza's research to understand if the human mind can literally alter physical matter and what that actually means for you in your own biology.
We have got the case studies, the hard biology, and the medical receipts.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because how does someone actually go about defying 4 surgeons and a shattered spine? I am assuming he went back to his parents' guest room to recover. That seems to be the standard move when you are 23 and completely broken.
Actually, the reality was much starker than that. He checked himself out of the hospital against strict medical advice.
Of course he did.
Yeah, and he had an ambulance take him to the home of 2 close friends. And for the next several months, he essentially lay face down. He could not go anywhere. He could not do anything.
He was lying there.
Just lying there. But instead of just waiting to see what happened, he decided to treat his healing as a rigorous full-time job. He instituted this grueling mental regimen. 2 hours a day, twice a day, he would go completely inward and attempt to mentally reconstruct his spine, vertebra by vertebra.
Mentally reconstruct his spine.
Exactly.
Trying to rebuild a crushed skeletal structure with thoughts. It sounds like trying to load a corrupted save file in a video game, but the console just keeps crashing over and over again.
That is a highly accurate way to describe his early attempts, honestly. He mentions that initially this mental reconstruction took him about 3 hours per session.
3 hours? Why so long?
Well, the reason it took so long is that his mind constantly wandered. He's lying there in agonizing pain, trying to visualize a healthy, solid spine, and suddenly he is stressing over whether he needs to sell his chiropractic
Oh,
practice.
sure. Real life creeps in.
Right. He is imagining living the rest of his life in a wheelchair. He is defaulting to the absolute worst case scenario.
Which is entirely human. I
Yeah.
mean, when we are in a crisis, our survival instincts take the wheel. We brace for impact. We flood our bodies with cortisol and adrenaline. It is incredibly difficult to hold a peaceful thought when your body feels like it's actively dying.
Exactly. But he made a strict, non-negotiable rule for himself. If his mind wandered to any extraneous thought, any negative outcome, any worry at all, he had to stop and start the entire mental reconstruction completely over from the very beginning.
Oh, wow. That sounds like psychological torture.
It was intense, but he believed that the signal he was sending to his body had to be clear, unpolluted, and completely uninterrupted.
You are in severe pain, and you are forcing yourself to hold a perfect, sustained mental image for hours. But according to the source material, after 6 weeks of this dark night of the soul, something shifted.
Yeah, he describes it as a massive breakthrough. After 6 weeks of failing, he finally made it through the entire inward reconstruction process without losing his attention once.
Not even a stray thought.
Not one. He said it felt like hitting a tennis ball right on the sweet spot. Something just clicked biologically. Suddenly, what was taking him 3 hours of grueling, frustrating effort dropped to just 45 minutes.
And the physical result actually followed that mental shift. The timeline documented here is wild to me.
It really is.
Because at 9.5 weeks after the accident, the 55-mile-an-hour impact that crushed his spine, he walked completely unassisted.
Yep.
At 10 weeks, he was back to seeing patients in his practice. And at 12 weeks, he was back to lifting weights.
And nearly 30 years later, he reports virtually no back pain at all.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back a bit.
Go for it.
Because if his mind was the only variable that changed his physical outcome, we have to isolate that variable. As incredible as his story is, how do we know his body did not just heal naturally?
That is the big question.
Right, because sometimes the human body does remarkable things, and we attribute it to whatever we happen to be doing at the time. Like, I drank green tea and my cold went away.
Correlation versus causation.
Exactly. We need to see if this same mental blueprint works on a completely different disease in a completely different person. Is there actual proof this works for anyone besides him?
It is a completely fair scientific question, and it is exactly the question Dispenza himself spent the next few decades trying to answer. Which brings us to the broader data set.
We'll see the receipts then.
The source material documents numerous medical case studies of people who applied this exact same protocol to vastly different conditions with equally paradigm-shifting results. Let's start with a woman named Lori.
Okay, what was her situation?
At age 19, she was diagnosed with polyostotic fibrous dysplasia.
Wow, okay. That is a mouthful.
It is. It is a rare degenerative genetic disease where the body essentially forgets how to make solid bone and instead replaces normal bone with a cheap, spongy, fibrous tissue.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It was. Over several decades, she suffered 12 major bone fractures. She relied on crutches and a cane, living in constant terror of simply stepping off a curb and shattering her leg.
If you are listening to this right now and you have been dealing with chronic pain or you have a condition your doctor has told you is permanent and structural, hearing these stories probably sounds incredibly frustrating or, impossibly hopeful.
Absolutely. Because then Lori attends one of his workshops in 2012.
And she does the mental work.
Yes.
Yeah.
She begins applying this exact mental protocol. During a meditation, she experiences a profound somatic release, what she described as a massive letting go of the rigid fear and control she used to hold her fragile body together.
And what happened?
Shortly after that workshop, she begins walking without a cane. And by January 2013, her x-rays showed zero evidence of fractures. Her bones were whole, solid, and undamaged.
A genetic bone disease.
Yeah.
Erased.
Yeah.
That is hard to wrap my head around. And it is not just structural issues in the skeleton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the case of Candace.
Yes, Candace is a fascinating one.
She was 28 years old when she was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. Her doctors noted it was likely triggered by extreme emotional stress from a volatile, toxic relationship.
Right, and we have her exact clinical lab values to track this, which makes it very interesting. In February 2011, her TSH, which is thyroid-stimulating hormone, was highly elevated at 3.61.
And to explain that briefly for everyone, A high TSH means the brain is screaming at the thyroid to work because the thyroid is failing.
Exactly. Furthermore, her antibodies were at 638, which means her own immune system was actively chewing up her thyroid tissue. Her doctors told her the condition was permanent and she would need synthetic hormones for the rest of her life.
But instead, she commits to the mental work. She meditates daily at 4:30 a.m. She leaves the toxic relationship. And by September 2011, which is just 5 months later, her TSH drops to a perfectly normal 1.15, and her antibodies drop down to 450.
And she did this without taking any medication. Her blood tests completely normalized.
That is just incredible.
And then there is Joanne, a 59-year-old mother and successful businesswoman diagnosed with advanced secondary progressive MS.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, MS is a severe neurodegenerative disease. The immune system attacks the myelin sheath, which is basically the insulation on the neurological wires in your brain and spine.
Her condition had deteriorated to the point where she was entirely bedridden and relying on a mobility scooter.
Just a devastating disease.
But the clinical documentation shows that at a workshop in Seattle, after a single 1-hour meditation where she experienced a massive internal shift, she stood up.
Wait, stood up from the scooter?
Yes. She walked 20 to 25 feet across the room completely unassisted, and within a short time, she taught herself how to walk normally again.
Okay, I'm getting genuinely fired up now.
I can tell.
Because I can somewhat understand blood markers shifting for a thyroid issue like Candace's. Stress hormones decrease, inflammation decreases, the immune system stops attacking the organ. That tracks with basic psychoneuroimmunology.
Sure, that makes logical sense.
But rebuilding a shattered skeleton, curing a genetic bone disease, a bedridden woman walking with advanced MS kit. Where is the actual medical mechanism for this? You cannot just, think new bone tissue into existence. I need the hard science here.
The hard science exists, and what is fascinating here is how it flips our understanding upside down. Let's shift from the anecdotal miracles to the peer-reviewed biological frameworks. It starts with self-directed neuroplasticity.
Hold on, let's break that phrase down for a second. Self-directed, meaning I consciously choose it, neuro meaning brain, and plasticity meaning moldable. So we are talking about choosing to physically mold the structure of my own brain.
Precisely. We used to think the brain was basically static hardware after a certain age, but the neuropsychiatrist Eric Kandel won a Nobel Prize for discovering that when you repeatedly stimulate a neural pathway, the number of connections in that neural bundle can actually double.
Oh, fire and wire. The neurons that fire together wire together.
Exactly. But what is really important here is how a thought in the brain actually translates into a physical change in the body. It happens through neuropeptides.
And neuropeptides.
These are basically chemical messengers. When you have a thought, your brain produces specific neuropeptides, which travel through your bloodstream and send signals throughout your entire body. These signals reach your cells and actually interact with your DNA.
Ah, so this is epigenetics.
Yes. Epigenetics literally means above the gene. Think of your DNA as a massive hardware blueprint. But epigenetics is the software switch operator that decides which parts of the blueprint get unfolded and read.
I like that analogy.
And the environment that controls those switches is not just the food you eat. It includes the chemical bath created by your neuropeptides, which are driven by your thoughts and emotions. We now know about something called immediate early genes, or IEGs.
What do they do?
These genes can reach peak expression in just 3 seconds.
3 seconds. That is fast.
Very fast. They are regulatory genes, meaning they act like master switches that control the expression of hundreds of other genes and thousands of proteins.
Okay, wait, what does expressing a gene mean practically?
To express a gene just means reading the recipe to bake a specific protein. So a thought triggers a neuropeptide, which changes the cell's chemical bath, which hits an immediate early gene, which literally bakes a physical protein in your body almost instantaneously.
Okay, that brilliantly bridges the gap between an invisible thought and a physical protein. But, I am still stuck on the sheer scale of the healing in these case studies. Baking a protein is one thing, but rebuilding a knee joint or a spinal column is another universe.
Then let's look at the placebo surgery research, because this is where the traditional medical model gets completely flipped on its head. In 1996, Dr. Bruce Moseley, a leading orthopedic surgeon at Baylor College of Medicine, conducted a study on 10 military veterans with severe osteoarthritis of the knee.
Okay, osteoarthritis.
Yes. These were men who walked with canes and had noticeable painful limps.
Wait, if you have severe osteoarthritis, your cartilage is physically gone.
Oh.
It is bone scraping on bone. You cannot just think cartilage back into existence. What did he do to these men?
He split them into 3 groups. 2 groups received standard arthroscopic surgeries. One got a debridement, where they literally scraped the damaged cartilage, and one got a lavage, where they flushed the joint with high-pressure water to clear out debris.
And the third group, what did he do to prove the mechanism?
The third group of 5 men received a sham surgery,
A fake surgery.
a completely fake surgery. Dr. Mosley anesthetized them, wheeled them into the operating room, made the incisions with a scalpel, splashed some water around to mimic the sounds of surgery, and then simply sewed them back up. He did not touch the actual joint, just an incision and stitches.
And let me guess, the sham group healed.
They healed just as well as the groups that got the actual physical scraping and flushing. They reported the exact same reduction in pain and the exact same increase in mobility.
Unbelievable.
But here is the kicker. 6 years later, 2 of the men who received the fake surgery were interviewed, and they were still walking normally, without pain. They had completely regained their lives.
6 years later, from a fake surgery.
And it is not an isolated study. There were 2 famous studies on internal mammary ligation, which used to be a common heart surgery for angina. Researchers compared the real surgery to a sham surgery, where they just made the incision on the chest and sewed the patient up.
Okay, and what were the numbers on that?
67% of the real surgery patients improved, but 83% of the sham surgery patients improved.
Great. I want to make sure I heard that right. The fake surgery had a higher success rate than the real surgery, 83% to 67%.
That is exactly what the clinical data showed. The patients so completely believed they were receiving a catalyst for healing that their brains signaled their bodies to manufacture the healing entirely on their own.
That is, well, it is staggering. That sham surgery data is the absolute turning point for me. So it is like your body is a fully stocked pharmacy. It holds every chemical, every protein, and every stem cell needed to repair any tissue. But that pharmacy door is locked, and it just needs the exact, correct prescription slip from the brain to unlock it.
That is a brilliant analogy.
The sham surgery was just a highly elaborate theatrical way of handing the brain that prescription slip. The ritual of the hospital room gave them permission to heal.
Exactly. The hospital gown, the surgeon, the scalpel, it gave them absolute permission to believe they were cured. But the people in Dispenza's case studies, Lori, Candace, and Milan, they bypassed the external ritual entirely. They learned how to write the prescription slip themselves from the inside out.
Which naturally leads to the most practical question for anyone listening to this deep dive.
Yeah.
If the biology is real and the mechanism of neuropeptides and epigenetics is real, how do you and I actually write that prescription slip tomorrow morning without booking a fake knee surgery?
It requires a specific formula in your daily practice. And we need to be very clear right now, this is not generic positive thinking.
Oh, good. Because that never works for me.
Right, because positive thinking is often just a mental gloss over a stressed body. You can think positive thoughts all day long, but if your body is still chronically addicted to the stress hormones of fear, anger, or victimhood, your biology will not change. You are sending a mixed signal to your cells.
Right. It is like putting a smiley face sticker on the dashboard of a car while the engine is actively on fire. The engine does not care about the sticker, you know. It is still burning.
Exactly. The protocol requires combining a very clear intention, which is a specific thought or mental vision of your future, with an elevated emotion, gratitude, joy, inspiration, awe.
But why the emotion? Why isn't the clear mental blueprint enough on its own?
Because the body acts as the unconscious mind, it literally does not know the difference between an external event that is actually happening in the material world and an internal emotional rehearsal that you are creating with your mind.
I think we need an analogy here because that is a wild concept.
Go for it.
It is like waking up in a cold sweat from a terrifying nightmare. You are lying completely safe in a dark, quiet bedroom. But your heart is pounding, your muscles are tense, your bloodstream is flooded with cortisol, your biology is reacting as if a tiger is actively chasing you simply because your mind rehearsed it. The body fully believed the mind's rehearsal.
That is the perfect way to understand it. Your body reacted to the nightmare because of the emotion attached to it. Now, apply that same mechanism to healing. If you vividly rehearse a healing experience and produce the exact elevated emotion of that future event, your body believes it is living in that healthy future reality in the present moment.
So it starts producing the chemicals.
Yes, that is how you write the prescription slip. You have to emotionally teach the body what the future feels like before it actually happens in your physical environment.
So if I am trying to heal a bad knee, I cannot just sit there and think, I want my knee to stop hurting. I have to actively cultivate the visceral feeling of immense gratitude and joy of walking on the beach with a perfect knee to the point where my physiological state changes as if I'm actually on the beach right now.
Yes. Dispenza calls this crossing the river of change from the old self to the new self. The old self is defined by the memory of the past, the pain, the medical diagnosis, the fear of the future.
And the new self.
The new self is defined by a vision of the future, but you have to sustain that new emotional state of being long enough for the immediate early genes to express, the neuropeptides to signal the cells, and the physical proteins to literally rebuild the tissue.
That is incredibly empowering, but it's also incredibly daunting. It fundamentally changes the game. It means taking radical, sometimes uncomfortable responsibility for what is happening inside your own mind every single day.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of healthcare, it fundamentally challenges the traditional medical model. We are very used to a passive, pill for an ill approach.
Give me a pill so I do not have to think about it.
Exactly. We want a doctor or a drug outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. This research argues that the most potent medicine available is generated internally, but it requires a level of mental discipline and emotional regulation that most of us are simply never taught in school.
It definitely moves concepts that used to be dismissed as voodoo or woo-woo right into the realm of measurable epigenetic biological processes.
Yeah.
We are literally watching the evolution of how we understand human biology in real time.
We really are. And it raises an important philosophical question about the placebo effect itself. Historically, the placebo effect has been viewed as a nuisance in clinical trials.
Right, something to weed out.
Exactly. It is an anomaly that researchers actively try to subtract mathematically to find out if a pharmaceutical drug really works. But what if we have had it completely backward this entire time? What if the placebo effect is not the anomaly we should avoid, but a superpower we should be actively teaching patients how to harness?
It is a superpower we all inherently possess. The premise here is that you are the placebo. It is just a matter of learning how to drive the vehicle instead of being trapped in the passenger seat, letting your stress hormones steer you right into a ditch.
Very well said.
This has been a massive shift in perspective. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final lingering thought to mull over.
I love leaving a good question at the end.
We have just spent the last 20 minutes unpacking the documented biological evidence that a clear intention combined with an elevated emotion can literally turn on genes that rebuild a shattered spine or heal an autoimmune disease. So what are the passive, unconscious, stressed out thoughts you are thinking right now currently building inside your body?
It is a profound question worth asking yourself every single morning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for coffee and diving into this incredible material. Keep exploring the unknown, keep asking the hard questions about your own potential, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.